who had sold him into slavery. Listen to these words from Genesis 50. Even though you intended to do harm to me, God intended it for good. Sometimes it just happens like that. Nothing happens in this world in vain. That's useless if we allow God to use it. Most of us here, I suspect, would say that some of the most valuable lessons we have learned in our life were learned through adverse times, when the bad stuff happened. Sometimes just hanging on. Sometimes not giving up. Sometimes not giving in is all that it takes to get something right. How many people do you know? I have a wonderful brother-in-law. He turned 93 yesterday. And I talked to him. He lives up in Syracuse. I called and I said, Deke, how are you doing? And I bet you know people like this, that when you ask them, how are you doing, their answer inevitably is going to be, I'm hanging in there. You know, that's just how we feel. We're hanging in there. And that's what we never know what's going to come of hanging in there. Paul put it like this. We boast in our sufferings. Know that suffering produces endurance. And endurance produces character. And character produces hope. And hope never disappoints us because God's love. Look at the front cover of your bulletin if you don't believe this. God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit that has been given to us. Now, you and I know exactly what kind of lives that we lead. I don't always get it right. And if I ask for a show of hands, how many of you always get it right? I expect you'd be sitting on your hands until we close the service, you know. And sometimes we lose hope. And we lose our comfort level. And we wiggle. And we squirm. And sometimes we might even see the cross and think only of the judgment and the consequences of our actions. And sometimes we get eaten up by guilt. And sometimes that guilt gets in the way of us accepting God's forgiveness and His love. And we get the message all fouled up. We're not happy with ourselves. We're not comfortable any longer in our skin. And folks, let me assure you, when we get that way, that is the furthest thing that God ever wants for His children. The good news, let's quickly jump from that thought. The good news is that all we really need to do is trust God and trust that faith that we all claim. So here's what I want you to remember as you go home this morning. Once we are justified, or once we're made good and right, and once we find peace with God through our faith in Jesus, we can follow Him. We can follow Jesus anywhere. And like those original disciples so many years ago, and like all Christians between them and us sitting here right this minute, every one of us is called to follow Jesus. And because we are justified, made good, made right, how? We are made right and good by faith through Christ. We will be strengthened in every possible way to follow Him. So that's our challenge this morning. Getting it right. Poor man back there in the jail. Simply means really getting it right with God. And when we get it right with God, we begin to get it right inside of ourselves, with ourselves. And then through the holy peace that passes all understanding that God gives to us, we can become comfortable being George Goodnight in our own skin. Being all of us in our own skin. And we can quit wiggling And we can quit squirming. And we can be assured that we are God's child. What did you play, Layne? Be still and know that God is on your side. That's the good news this morning. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.